What's up, everybody? We are back here, Lazy Booking A2D Radio, with one of our regulars, but we're going back to his roots here to have a conversation with the Blue Meanie. In the meantime, make sure you guys like, subscribe, and follow. And you know what? Let's get rolling here.
Everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man.
Who's that kid? Nick. He looks like Beaker from Muppets.
The one on FS1, Nick Wright.
Oh,
Yep.
Yeah. I got something
That's
for
amazing.
I
did not even. I love that.
If I get 5 women and they're all in the same room with me, we're going at it at 110%.
Welcome in, everybody. Here, A2D Radio. A little pre-recorded version because it's Memorial Day weekend. And listen, we all want to have some fun. And we have a special guest who we love to talk birds with frequently here, frequent contributor to A2D Radio, and ambassador of all things Philadelphia, Mr. Brian Heffron, the Blue Meanie ECW legend. What's up, my brother?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on Lazy Booking because today I am feeling very lazy after last night's Metallica concert. Woo!
That's what I was gonna say, man. I mean, you have had a very eventful Memorial Day weekend so far.
I've had a very eventful May. Just between just everything I got to do in real life, and then like wrestling bookings and conventions, and it feels like it's been nonstop. But I love it. I love it.
Hey, man. I mean, you get all over the place. We had the NWA show, all kinds of things. This guy's been everywhere and anywhere that you can find him, and we love it. Can't get enough of it. Show a little love to our show sponsor, SpecializedPhysicalTherapy.com. Dr. Paul Vidal and his award-winning team can be found in Burlington and Cherry Hill, New Jersey. You can find them on the web. So any kind of aches and pains, any previous injuries that you have where you need a reliable team to help put you on a program and get you back to top form, please go to SpecializedPhysicalTherapy.com. Talk to Dr. Paul and his team. They'll get you situated. So yeah, Brian, we're here. Second episode back. Happy to have you. Knew I had to have you in as one of the returning guests because you're kind of one of the OGs here. But we had said before, it's funny because we've done a bunch of shows together, but had never done an actual sit down wrestling interview. So I mean, what better time, right?
Yeah, I mean, wrestling business is booming right now. It's better than ever. Everybody seems to be thriving, and I'm happy for it. I have friends in all the different companies, and I want everybody to do well. So, I haven't seen the wrestling business is pretty strong right now.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, when you talk about, it's just such a different scene too when you see all these different companies cross promoting and working together or merging, and it's just it'll never be the territory days, but it's probably as close as we're gonna see in terms of bringing together matchups you never thought you would see, and us also look at some of the talent in TNA Impact that get to go over and work in WWE, and then you see a Jordan Grace or a Joe Hendry, who Joe Hendry ends up working WrestleMania with Randy Orton. I mean, it's just a really wild wrestling world, and it's exciting.
Yeah, and it shows the benefit of when people work together. There's a lot of things in pro wrestling. I don't like, especially on the indie level when one guy will run a show and somebody will purposely run a show head to head, and it's just like, yeah, it's just better. When we work together, and the TNA TNA WWE / NXT deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful thing. They had there was an event last night, and Trick Williams challenged NXT wrestler Trick Williams challenged for the TNA title, and no spoilers here. Well, I'm sure everybody's. If you have own social media, you know what the finish was. But
I mean, this drops by Tuesday, tomorrow night. So if they don't know by then, I mean, that's a new episode of NXT. So by then, they should have watched.
yeah. And that's the thing too. Like wrestling's so strong. I don't even really need to watch the TVs. I just go on social media and I watch the passion and excitement of the fans just talking about what's going on. And it's a great time to be a wrestling fan right now.
It really, really is. Our opening topic, Brian. This is a man you know very, very well.
Right.
And it's something that's been debated quite a bit on some of our other shows here in this very ring, which you can also check here on A2D Radio, typically on Tuesdays, with Andy and his crew. But we're going to talk about Paul Heyman, who you've worked for and worked with, and it's kind of the age-old debate, right? Paul Heyman is the greatest pro wrestling manager of all time. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I'm going to give my answer. I think Paul Heyman would agree with me. I would say no, not the greatest manager of all time, because the greatest wrestling manager of all time is Bobby the Brain Heenan.
Agreed.
But I think Paul Heyman would say that too. But knowing Paul, he would also say, "I am not a manager. I am an advocate. I am the wise man." There's been plenty of times people try to call him a manager and he corrects him. No. I am an advocate for Brock Lesnar. His last run with Roman Reigns, he was the wise man. I don't quite know who he's going to be with Seth Rollins yet, but greatest manager of all time, and I think everybody would agree with this universally is Bobby the Brain Heenan.
Yeah, I think anyone who's obviously been in the game that long in terms of watching would agree, and I do think that the way you said it is probably exactly what he would say, is that he's more than a manager too, right? So I just think Bobby, when you talk about pioneering it, there's just so much that he contributed to everything. I mean, it was not just getting his guys over, although he did. It was, I mean, he was, for all intents and purposes, was like the foil to everybody. Hogan, Warrior. I mean, you go through the list, and he, Bret Hart. I mean, you go through it, and he really was. He was just such a pioneer with the way that he worked with the talent, and then obviously the commentary, which is a different thing. But
yeah,
I mean, you just look at Bobby, and I always say, and I guess you could say this about Paul too. When you look at a guy, and you're just like, man, I just would love to see that guy get punched in the face. or you see him flailing around in the weasel suit, right? Like, it's just like they did their job and they did it so well.
Yeah, Bobby, I mean, just go back to WrestleMania 3. Look how many times he was at ringside with different wrestlers, the Bobby Heenan family, when someone needed to get, elevated, Bobby was the one. Like when Ric Flair came to the WWE and they, Flair sent the belt ahead of his arrival, Bobby Heenan was the one to show the NWA World Title on WWF television. When Andre the Giant turned heel, Bobby the Brain Heenan was the manager. So, and Bobby didn't really have to do much. He knew the art of psychology, and he could just turn to and look at the crowd and get a response from, so anybody who was under, Bobby Heenan's tutelage, benefited, in front of the camera and behind the scenes. Paul, great manager. There's a lot of great managers. But to me, Bobby Heenan will always be number one.
Yeah, Heenan, Sensational Sherry was something special as well, and obviously Paul Bear, Percy Pringle. I mean, you're right. You can go up and down the list of managers, but I think Bobby is the standard. But yeah, so let's transition. We're going to get back into Paul because obviously we're going to get into your ECW days. But I would like to just talk about early on you with pro wrestling, right? So, what's cool about you, and Brian's a great social media follow. Obviously, you can check him out there at Blue Meanie BWO. And one of the really cool things that you do is you share a lot of pictures from prior to being a fan, and obviously, prior to being an in-ring performer, and then a lot of really cool stuff from when obviously you were, working in ECW in its heyday. So, what were what were your early influences? What was it like? I can remember the moment I first started watching professional wrestling. I can remember actually my first match is really weird, but I can remember like my first long form pay-per-view event that I watched, which was WrestleMania 5. But like, what were your early influences? What programs did you watch as a young guy when you were growing up and starting to fall in love with professional wrestling?
I basically watched everything. I was being a child of the there's a being a child of the 1980s. I was raised on hose water and neglect. No, I was basically just, I would spend my weekends, in front of the TV, just or looking through the TV guide or the TV section of the paper and just, watching wrestling. Like when I first watched wrestling, it was a Saturday, and was getting ready to watch a Phillies game, and I had a neighbor kid. I was about 9 years old, and I went to the next door to my buddy Sean. I was like, "Hey, you want to come over and watch the Phillies game?" He's like, "I can't. I'm watching wrestling." I was like, "Oh, what's wrestling?" I was like, "Well, come over to my house. Let's watch over here." And I watched WWE put on Channel 48 back then, and the first I watched the whole show, but the match that stuck out to me was Mr. Fuji and Mr. Saito winning the WWF tag belts from Tony Green and Rick Martel, and from then I was just hooked. And then, I would tune in every week. And then, you know, um, when my family moved to Atlantic City for a little bit, uh, you know, you would just channel surf, and then you find AWA, and then you find World Class Championship Wrestling, which was syndicated, Bill Watts' UWF, Polynesian Professional Wrestling from Hawaii, which, was the Rock's grandparents' promotion. Just watching so many different things. And living in Atlantic City, the cool thing is we got New York channels too, because, Atlantic City being a vacation spot, they had the New York channels for all the people visiting, so I could watch WWF on Channel 48 and 17 out of Philly. And then that night, I could also watch WWF on Channel 9 and 11 out of New York City, and
I
so,
remember that, by the way. I was a part of that same time frame. Yeah, 9 and 11.
yep, yep, yep. And sometimes, and the cool thing about that was sometimes it would be the same show, but every now and then they would have that like space where like Howard Finkel, would come in and go, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget we'll be at the Mid Hudson Civic Center in Poughkeepsie. That was for the New York channel. So Philadelphia would be like, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget we'll be returning to Allentown, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
It's just the things I remember, and then getting the wrestling. I watched wrestling so much, I just became a keen observer of it, and just picking up on knowing or unknowingly picking up certain traits and aspects that, like, when I became a wrestler, certain things became like second nature because I was used to watching it. It's one thing to teach somebody how to do something, but when they've seen it done so many times growing up as a fan, some things just became second nature. But as a kid, I just watched everything. And then like the magical moment, because in Atlantic City we didn't get TBS, so I couldn't watch 605 on Saturday for NWA Worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
I mean NWA World Championship Wrestling. We got NWA Worldwide on Channel 48 and on Channel 17 in Philly. So I was like, this is amazing. And then NWA started running Philly. I would go to those shows, and just I was a wrestling junkie, just had to watch it. And if somebody knocked it, I would defend it. And, like, I defended it like as if I was already in the business, Oh, that's bullshit. Those turnbuckle pads or those turnbuckles are padded. I was like, yeah, but it hurts.
Yeah,
Boxing gloves are padded too, and look at what they do.
exactly.
I was coming up with all kind of defenses as a kid. Made me a good worker for later on.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, no, listen, I was a staunch defender as well.
Yeah.
I think it's so funny too, because now as an adult, like so many, I talk to a fair amount of people that I've known since I was young, and they say it. They're like, dude, you are the guy that just always loved wrestling. I put the
Yeah.
stickers on my notebook before, you know what I mean? And I was the same way. I mean, probably my first like real pay-per-view event I watched, I believe, was WrestleMania 5. And then I remember random things. Like my introduction to WCW was watching like WCW Saturday Night, and like El Gigante was, I don't remember if it was a battle royal or a multiple team match. But I
Yeah.
remember it was El Gigante and a bunch of people in the ring. And I'm just like, I have like the most like random memories of my early wrestling love. I mean, I got into it because my cousin gave me the rubber figures that they had with Hogan and Andre and Sheik.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that was kind of what ignited the passion. But it is cool. Like I said, you share a lot of really cool stuff. And can you remember what your first live event was? I know recently, like you'll find yourself on like things that, like, you'll take a screenshot or something of, a televised event, and you just see, you're like, there I am right there, boom, and you're like front row, like, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember what your first live event was?
It was a WWF house show in '82, and it was in Atlantic City. And the cool part was it was at the Atlantic City Convention Center, but it wasn't like the main hall that WrestleMania 4 or 5 was in. There's like a little, there's a ballroom off of that, and the first place I went to go see professional wrestling was the same room I graduated high school in.
Oh,
Eventually,
that's wild.
yeah. So I walked across the same stage, which was even cooler because I knew I was going into professional wrestling. So it's just like, the place I went to see professional wrestler for the first time was the place I graduated high school on my journey to go become a professional wrestler. But the main event for that show, and I have the date saved somewhere because there's a great website called the history of the WWF.com, something like that. It's got all the results. You can just look it up by year. But the main event was Andre the Giant, Andre the Giant, Chief J Strongbow, Jules Strongbow versus Mr. Fuji, Mr. Saito, and Blackjack Mulligan.
Wow.
And I think it was a best of 5 match, which is weird. It's that 2 out of 3 falls. Back then they used to do best 3 out of 5 falls, which is weird. But I vividly remember Andre the Giant walking by me and me patting him on the stomach, and I'm never gonna wash this hand again. And believe it or not, I haven't. No, but going to my first show with my grandfather, and then went to another show, at the convention hall, and then after that, it was, it wasn't until like maybe the AWA came to Atlantic City in '85 that I went to those as well, with my grandfather, and first pay-per-view. Oh, I'm so old. They weren't called pay-per-views, when WrestleMania first started, it was on closed circuit TV, and
Closed circuit TV.
and me and my grandfather would go to Resorts Casino for WrestleMania 1 through 3, where you just sit in the ballroom, the giant movie screen, and watch wrestling with a bunch of total strangers, and you're reacting like as if you were there,
Oh yeah.
But once they announced WrestleMania 4 was coming to Atlantic City, it was just like, oh my god, I'm actually going to go see a WrestleMania, and then they had WrestleMania 4 and 5 in Atlantic City. I went to both of those, and my grandfather worked at Trump Plaza, and his boss knew I was a huge wrestling fan. And he was like, hey, I know your grandson's a huge wrestling fan. We have this thing Saturday. Bring him by. And my grandfather took me up to the casino. They had a little ballroom there, and his boss walked me through. And it was like walking into Willy Wonka's. It was just like a room full of like WWF wrestlers and fans and like all these cool things going on. It was like it was technically it was a wrestling convention, but
Yeah.
it was for like the high rollers at the casino. But you know, uh, I remember going to either the first or second one, and Howard Eskin was there, and he's walking a young Spike Eskin into the
Oh my god.
the thing too. So, dude, that was just my grandfather left. He just left me there. Back then, in the 80s, I was trusted just to handle myself. So I was there all day. And then after the convention ended, the meet and greet stuff, they had stuff at night, and then I just stood there and just waited for wrestlers to show up, and you used to see all the wrestlers walking around, and you get autographs and get some photos taken. It was a magical time to be a wrestling fan. Just as a young kid, just to see that. You fall in love with pro wrestling, and pro wrestling comes to you. Comes to your hometown. But yeah, just so many cool moments. Going to AWA at Tropicana, and so many like cool matches that I got to see. And then of course like when they came out with the VHS of WrestleMania 4, it's the Hogan Andre where it's the two tape when you fold it out like that.
Yep.
Fold out of Hogan Andre, and if you watch the first V8 the first tape, they show those the party I went to, and you see me standing there next to like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and it's just like it's like it's so storybook it, but it's so like if he did a movie and said all these things happen, you'd be like, that's too corny to be real, but
Yeah, but it is.
it happened. Yeah,
It's wild. Yeah, I can see when I was a kid, my family didn't really take me to wrestling. They just thought it was like a phase. So like, I mean, but it wasn't obviously. And so I didn't start getting taken to events until I was in my preteens. So I think my first event live was ECW at the Blackwood CYO.
oh wow, all right.
Yeah, and it was December of 97. So I was 12, getting ready to turn 13 soon. And I remember there was like a tag match. It was like Sandman, and I think Spike Dudley versus the Dudley Boys. I believe there might have been a third element to that. It might have been a 3-on-3. But the one thing I remember, you're talking about Pat and Andre on the stomach.
Yeah.
They start rolling into the crowd, and somewhere I have pictures, a couple, not many, but I have like 2 or 3 pictures from this event. I have one with the Sandman in front of me, and I have one with Devon taking a punch to the face, and he's kind of turned towards my camera as he's like, I have to find it. But what I remember vividly was Spike gets thrown into the guard. Well, first they fought, so they took all the chairs out. So we had like a general mission, and my dad and my cousin are like, to the front of the guardrail. So I'm like, okay. So I run up there, and Spike got whipped into me, and I think he opened up the hard way because he hit right at my feet, and blood just shot onto my pants. And he was not bleeding before then.
Yeah.
So I think he opened up the hard way. And I remember just being like, I'm like 12 years old, and I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. He bled on my pants. I'm like, well, this is Philadelphia professional wrestling. I love it.
Yeah.
That was my first event. Yeah.
Yeah, CYO was a fun building. I remember that might have been a show when Paul started talking to us about like pay-per-view and stuff like that. Just everything, going into barely legal,
Hmm.
but once there's always the talk of pay-per-view, pay-per-view, pay-per-view. I distinctly remember a meeting at at Blackwood CYO. And that just brought a memory into my head, so
Hmm.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've heard some very fun stories. I've talked to Salmon and Raven, and they've told me some interesting things that probably shouldn't go on the air, but it's good stuff. I'll tell you that about the Blackwood CYO.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's just I remember it was a cool. I believe one of the pictures I had was of the ring, and it was Taz and Sabu. I cannot remember. I could look the card up. I actually did look it up before. I can't remember if they were one on one or in a tag match. It might have been a tag match, but I do remember that show was a great show. Anyway, sidetrack there. So you obviously grew up like a fan, and anyone who talks to you too kind of knows like you're very intelligent with the history. You're a wrestling historian for the most part, right?
I try to.
So yeah, I mean you really are. So, as you grow this love and this passion for professional wrestling, um, an opportunity opens up for you, and let's talk about that. Um, talk about the opportunity that you had to get into the business and what it was like for you to go through the training process, and that eventually led to the doorsteps of ECW.
Just like just being a student of professional wrestling, just watching every week, and then I go to high school and I meet a friend named Justin Rosanio, and he was like into the wrestling newsletters and stuff like that, and he introduced me to the world of Wade Keller and Dave Meltzer, and reading the newsletters, and from there I just start seeing ads for wrestling schools, and initially I was going to try to go to the Malenko school in Tampa because I had just seen the Malenko brothers versus the British Bulldogs from Japan, and I fell in love with that match. I was like, "Oh, that guy has a school. I want to go to do that."
Mm-hmm.
And there was a time where I found out that the Monster Factory was having a tryout, and so I went to the day after WrestleMania 8, I went to for a tryout at the Monster Factory, and Larry Sharp was there, Dennis Corluzzo was there, me and about maybe 12 other guys, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And out of that group of people, Larry pulled me and like two others into the office to talk about, tuition and all that stuff. And it would have been nice to, go to the Monster Factory too. But when I think about it in hindsight, I'm glad I didn't, because I think I had to get as far away from home to start training, because if my grandmother would saw like all the bumps or bruises, she would have gave me the Catholic guilt, to quit, so. But I was going to go to Malenko's, and I was talking to a woman named Phyllis Lee, who was like she wrestled back in the day, but she worked with the Malenko's, and um I found out it was like the cost of living down in Tampa was like 650 and that for like 1994. I was like, ooh, it's kind of stiff,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
you know, six back then, 650, you get a decent, 2-bedroom house, to rent, so I was like, ooh, I don't know what I'm gonna do. But then she's like, have you heard of Al Snow? I was like, yeah, because he was just starting to make a name for himself with the Sabu feud, and that was in the tape trading community and in the newsletters. So I was like, I changed course, and I was like, all right, I'll go to Al Snow's. So I sent my tuition in. At the time I was working in casinos. I was working at Trump Plaza, ironically, and because I went to all the WrestleManias and all that stuff there.
Yeah.
Working as a security guard, and I would take my paycheck. Half would go to the house, my grandparents, and half would go in a sock drawer just to save towards my tuition. And once I saved up to the tuition, sent that in, continued to work, check goes to the house. Now I'm just saving for like living expenses, food, rent, all that stuff. So when I get out there, it's just I'm focused on training, and
Mhm.
it was such a gamble, but it was it was like hitting the winning lottery ticket, because Al had been in the business 13 years up to that point, and he'd been training people since 1990. And I went there just on the advice of a woman I had never met, and I could have easily shown up to an empty warehouse. You hear all the horror stories of people showing up, paying money to go get trained to wrestle, and they show up for the first day and the building's empty.
Mhm.
Wrestlers moved on to the next town to pull off the next scam.
Mhm.
Al was a phenomenal trainer, as we've come to know through like Tough Enough and
Mhm.
everything he does with Ohio Valley Wrestling. And you know, I, Al would do like 2-a-days. Because a lot of people try. He would work around people's schedules. If you worked at night, you could come to the day training. If you worked during the day, you could come at night. And living in the school, I would do both sessions. So 2-a-days, 5 days a week, except for Sundays, and like on the weekends, if he had a show Friday, Saturday, I would just hop in the van with him and go to the shows. And I'll tell you this, I learned a lot more on those car rides than like stuff he's taught me in the ring, because you can teach people to do moves. You teach teach people to do moves, but it's the how, the whys, the whens, the whats of professional wrestling that's the hardest to grasp.
Mhm.
There'll be things Al would show me during the week, during training, and then I go watch his match, and he would implement the things he taught me into his match, so I could see them in the proper context. Not that there's like really a proper context, but like a situation where you could use it.
Mhm.
One of the biggest mistakes a lot of the young guys make is they think, oh, well, we called in the back, so we have to do it in the ring. But if it's not there to be done, you don't always have to do the things you talked about in the back.
Right.
So he worked in the things we talked about, like, what he showed me during training, and, you know, we'd be driving back, to Ohio from wherever we were, or driving back to Lima from wherever we were. Be like, did you notice anything? And I would call the spot out to him, and it's like, like a Mr. Miyagi moment, like,
Yeah.
but yeah, it came a point where he said, I lived there for a year, and in between I would drive home, to fill, I would pick like a weekend a month, drive home. Cause when I first got out to Al's, my grandmom called to say my grandfather had, you know, big diagnosis with cancer. And, but his words were, don't come home,
Yeah.
because he knew I wanted to do this. And like I said, I had to get as far away from in hindsight, the best thing I could have done was be as far away from home. Just, you know, people don't realize you learn how to hit the ropes, for like a good week and a half to a month. Your whole side's purple. So if I'm walking in the house with my back and everything's all purple, she'll be like, oh my God, you got to quit, you know?
Yeah.
But then, getting the news that my grandfather was sick, and he said, don't come home. That gave me extra focus to say, hey, I have to do this. I have to do this. And I would go home. I made the conscious choice to, drive home like 1 week in a month, just to see my grandfather, see my grandmother. And, of course, I conveniently booked it around ECW shows. And so I would go to an ECW show, and after the ECW show, head back to Ohio. But
Yeah.
uh, I was there for a year, and Al said, hey, you've been here for a year. And he was giving me bookings. I was, working his student shows. And then Sabu, um, who would come down to Al's gym shows and work matches, for Al, took a liking to me and started booking me. He started running shows up in Michigan under the NWA banner, which everybody jokingly called NWA Sabu. People think it was called NWA Sabu. It wasn't called NWA Sabu. He just, as a rip, like, I'm going to work for NWA Sabu, but it stuck, I guess. But and Sabu would put me on shows, and there was one show where Sabu flew out Paul Heyman, Tommy Dreamer, and Taz, and I had a match where Sabu would always do a run in during a random match just to pop the crowd to get them fired up, and he ran in on my this one show, that show with Paul Heyman, Dreamer, and Taz. He ran in on my match and shaved me and my opponent's head, and Paul Heyman was with him, and Paul's hit me with the phone and all that stuff. And so flash forward years later when I go to ECW, and Paul Heyman's like, "You look familiar." I'm like, "Well, sir, you and Sabu shaved my head in Michigan." He goes, "Oh, that's right. That's right." And
I love that.
from that point on, I was like, this kid wanted to get his head shaved for no money, I earned brownie points with Paul for that, but it's about instinct. Because when I moved back to, we lived in Atlantic City, my grandfather passed away. I went home for the funeral, went back to school. Al's like, it's time to go back or move back. And again, looking through the newsletters, just looking for any shows that were going on and just showing up. Al always taught me, show up to a show, leave your bag in the car, say, hey, introduce yourself to everybody at the building and find a promoter and go, hey, I understand your show's completely booked, but if there's an opportunity, my bag's in the car. And been plenty of times, Dennis, I would work, to go to a Dennis Corluzzo show, goes, hey, Brian, so-and-so stuck in traffic, grab your bag, you're on third. All right.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then I just started getting booked that way. And, there's a series of 3 shows I did. One was in Baltimore, one was in West Virginia, and one was in Pittsburgh for a promoter named Norm Connors. Norm was another huge part of my wrestling career, because he's one of the first, after Sabu and Severn would also run shows. I feel bad forgetting him, but I would work for Al, Dan, Sabu, then Norm Connors started booking me in Pittsburgh. I did a show in Pittsburgh, and he had all 3 of those shows, the Baltimore, West Virginia, and Pittsburgh show had Raven and Stevie Richards on those shows, and they kind of took a liking to me. The Pittsburgh show, I go out and have a match, and I come back, and Raven's going to work one of my classmates, so to speak, Ray the Crippler Roberts, who that guy, he was a character. So I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I got to watch. So I watched their match. Raven comes back through the back. I go, oh, I really enjoyed your match. He's like, hey, kid, nice moonsault. I went, oh, shit. He watched my match. And next day, that's, we all stayed at Norm's house like it was a flop house, and, drank and crashed. And the next day we went out to lunch, and that's when Raven proposed the idea of being the sidekick for Stevie Richards. He goes, Stevie's my lackey, and we want to have Stevie to have a lackey, and we want to have like a big fat guy, but the guy we got in mind, he can't wrestle, but you wrestle and you do a moonsault. You want to do it? I was like, I'll be in ECW, right? He's like, yeah. I was like, I'm in.
Done.
Yeah. All right. And then I debuted in October for ECW, October 95. And that didn't air because there was a fire incident on that show. And all that footage disappeared. So that in the meantime, we worked for Norm again, and Raven came up with the idea for the Blue Meanie. So November to remember 1995, the night Sabu returned ECW after being fired, I debuted as the Blue Meanie, and the funny thing about that was I was told, they put me in the crowd as a plant, and I was under strict orders. Do not sell for anybody other than Stevie Richards. So the whole time I'm sitting there like this, not impressed with anything. And of course, after the first match, Paul Heyman comes out, turn the lights off, turn the lights back on. There's Sabu. And he's doing the point, and the crowd's losing their mind, and they're cheering and they're popping and throwing babies in the air, and not literally, but
Yeah.
we're throwing beer in the air. And I'm just sitting there like this.
And I'm sure internally you want to pop at that point.
Oh, it was a battle. Like Tracy Smothers would say, man, it was a battle. Just not reacting. That was the beginning of my wrestling career and leading up to ECW. And it's just instinct, just knowing the right time to do something. There was a night where I was working at casinos, and I worked at Trump Plaza. My mom worked at Taj Mahal, and we're walking down in Langston. If you know Langston, they have the shuttle buses called jitneys on Pacific Ave.
Uh-huh.
We're going to go get a jitney to go to work, and I would get off at Trump Plaza. She would continue on to Taj Mahal, but we were walking from our house to go get the jitney, and I'm standing there. We're standing at a red light waiting to cross the street, and I go, I'm just going to go get my 2 weeks tonight. I think I'm going to go. She went, okay. And I was like, I went to work that night, gave my 2 weeks, and 2 days later, the day after WrestleMania 10, I'm driving to Lima, Ohio to become a professional wrestler. It's
crazy.
Something told me, something in the universe said it's time to, crap or get off the pot.
Really do it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I think there's a little trepidation. I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this. Yeah, I'm going to do this. And I got Phyllis in Ohio going, so when you coming out? You paid the tuition. When you coming out? And kind of threw down the punk card, and I picked it up. I said, I'm coming. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's crazy too. So you obviously when you came in, I mean, you talk about the facial mannerisms they made you have to do reset. I mean, it's so iconic, right? And
yeah, I stole a lot from George Carlin and my grandfather.
Oh wow, George. I mean, obviously your grandfather. That's awesome, by the way.
I remember, I'd be laying in my crib, and my grandfather would be looking at me like going, me going like this. Ooh, it's like a tribute to my grandfather.
That's tremendous. I never knew that. That's amazing.
I'll have to send you the photo of me and my grandfather doing that face at each other.
Oh my God, I love it. So,
yeah.
I mean, let's talk about the name, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some people have heard it, some haven't. Let's talk about the origins of the name, the Blue Meanie.
Yeah. Look, like they say in boxing, the best nicknames are the one you can't give yourself a nickname. The best ones, have to be given to you by someone else. And I had a name. I was calling myself Brian Rollins, and I had zebra tights. So I was calling myself the Zebra Kid, and just trying to find my way. So when we're working for Norm, after I debuted, can't show the footage. All right, let's think of another thing to do. We're driving from Pittsburgh. I say Pittsburgh, but it's like wherever town was in Western Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And we're driving back to Raven's house in Jersey through a blizzard, and just talking wrestling. Like I said, I learned a lot about the business on those car rides, which I feel so bad for kids nowadays because they don't, get a group of young guys going, find a show to go work, and you're just sitting there talking about wrestling and, recapping the show you just did. But, we're driving through the blizzard, and that's when Raven pitched the idea for the Blue Meanie. And I was like, it's like, hey, did you ever see that movie, The Yellow Submarine? And I was like, yeah, when I was a kid. He's like, you remember the character Blue Meanie? I was like, yeah, vaguely, yeah, I kind of remember it. You're going to be the Blue Meanie. I was like, all right, Bobby in ECW, right? You know,
That's
he's like,
it.
yeah, I'm in. You want to paint when you see this, you want to paint your whole body blue, but just do your hair. I'm like, all right. So we get to Raven's house at like 7 a.m. or whatever it was. I crash out on his couch, and then we wake up, and the next day, and we go to the local Blockbuster and rent the Yellow Submarine, and we watched the movie. And I was not, I was too sober to watch it, but it's definitely a trippy movie. You know, it's better to watch impaired. But we watched, but we would just watch the Blue Meanie parts. So Raven, you know, which did the thing which they do down at NXT now. Raven would be such a great mentor, you know, or teach people psychology and promos. He would have me stand there in his living room, yell out a subject, and go, "Blue Meanie, cut a promo on this, cut a promo on that." In character, in front of him, off the top of my head, I would just have to cut a promo on whatever topic he called out, and through that, he started bringing me around to ECW shows and introduced me to Paul, and I would go to the after show parties to get acquainted with the wrestlers and party with them. And but the night I was going to debut as Blue Meanie, it was, I always say it's like the movie Fart Man. I mean the movie Private Parts, when Howard Stern puts on the Fart Man costume and he's walking through backstage and everybody's just looking at him like, who the hell is this? I'm in the back and I put on my half shirt and my Daisy Dukes, and people are just like side eyeing me like, who the they kind of knew me, but like now I had blue hair and I'm wearing a half shirt and Daisy Dukes. And a little piece of trivia is like I forgot to bring a mirror for my paint. Now at this time I was using grease paint, which was a huge mistake. And later on I would go on to use liquid latex. Like there's a paint called Liquitex. Like the Road Warriors used it, Ultimate Warriors thing, that they all used.
Yeah.
But I forgot my mirror, and it's like, shit, Raven, I forgot my mirror. I can't paint my eyes. And he called over, and Nancy Sullivan, aka Woman, came over, and he's like, can you help him just paint his face? And the first couple shows, I conveniently forgot my mirror on purpose. After that, I started forgetting my mirror. Oh darn, I don't have a mirror. Can you paint my face again? And Nancy was such a sweet woman. She's a sweet person, and she kindly painted my face and had fun with it. But yeah, and then I, like I said, go out ringside. They sent me next to Sign Guy Dudley, aka Lou D'Angeli, Louis Dangerously, and we sit there and the Blue Meanie is born.
And it's amazing now to see that. I feel like it's a character that maybe people couldn't have foreseen that 3 decades later.
I wouldn't have seen it, just
like you would think that's like you still, it's a blip, not a blip in the radar, but it's a stop on the road to getting to where you're going to go. And 30 years later now, Brian, because you're talking now, you said 1995, we're talking 30 years later. It's one of the most recognizable, beloved personalities and characters in the history of ECW. It really is. And
crazy.
And we'll talk about it shortly, but I think that kind of indicated, or that is indicated when you look at now the 2300 arena and all the events and everybody wants Meanie there. Then on top of it, obviously WWE does their priority pass thing, and you were a part of that. We'll touch on that shortly. But part of the history of that is another group that seemed like it was an idea just to be for a little bit of fun and short-lived, and became absolutely iconic, and that would be the Blue World Order, the Blue Guy.
Yeah.
Obviously with you, Stevie Richards, and Nova.
Yeah.
So let's kind of talk about the idea. Obviously, we know where the idea came from, but how this was pitched and was this expected to be, something that lasted for months and months, or did you think, hey, this is a one-off or a two-off, kind of like, remember like DX used to do like the little 1 week parodies of things?
Yeah.
Was that the intention, or was this something like, let's roll with this, or did it just roll organically? Give us a story.
Just we're it was me, Steven, and Raven, and at that time Nova hadn't come along yet, but he would join us shortly. And me and Stevie, we're driving from Ravens to ECW Arena, and he just comes up with the idea of doing parodies. It's like, I want you and the Meanie come out and call yourselves the Fabulous Ones, and you could be Stevie and Stan, and just do it. And we're like, fine, all right. And he's like, I want you guys to do the Fargo strut. And we're like, what the fuck is that? And then we get to the building, and he shows us, and we do it, and we botched it. We murdered it. It's just not murdered in a good way either. Like, we should have been brought up on charges for what we did to the Fargo strut. But went out and did it, and the crowd reacted. So we just started doing parodies, and there's so much violence in ECW. You needed a moment of, to bring the crowd down, not like make them sad, but like emotionally, they're supercharged. You can't keep going up and up and up and up. You got to, bring them to a point, bring them back down to bring them up to the next level. So by the time they get to the main event, they're not worn out, they're
Right.
not. So me and Stevie would do these things like parodies, and just to lighten the mood in ECW. I was Colonel the Meanie. I was Blue Dust. He was Baron Von Stevie. We did a whole bunch, but like, I think the crescendo, the one I thought that was going to be the be all end all was when we came out as Kiss.
And the Kiss one was amazing.
Dude, I was like, oh, it can't get better than this.
Yeah.
And if you watch that show, it was a show called The Doctor Is In, named after Dr. Death Steve Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And if you see us come out as Kiss and we're in the ring, there's a young Tony Khan in the crowd.
No way.
Wearing an orange Taz shirt, and he's holding up a sign because, in the 90s, like in the early AOL days, you would have, message boards and chats, and I would go into a chat with like a couple friends, and in our circle, there was a young Tony Khan, and I got to know him in the 90s a little bit. And he's holding up a sign, we want Jer, and Jeremiah was one of our friends from the chat. And Jeremiah was always ringside, but I'm assuming he missed that show. That's why Tony Khan had to sign up.
Yeah.
But we do come out as Kiss. I was like, that's it. We can't top that. So we're just bullshitting around, and got to do the NWO, right? And over the years, I keep telling the same story, but I was reminded by Bubba Ray, but Dudley, that like he kind of came along and said, yeah, you guys should probably do the NWO, and then at that time we're just trying to think of names, and I would still talk to Al Snow, who was in WWF at the time, and I was like, yeah, we're thinking about doing the NWO, but call it the BWO, and instead of the bad guy, be the blue guy, and we're I was telling Al these ideas, and he's popping, and I was like, well, I popped Al, so and it just came down like who's going to play who, I was like, well, Stevie, you're the tallest, you should probably be Nash, and I'm your tag partner, and Scott Hall's his tag partner. We could be Hall and Nash, and nobody could be Hogan, and I went to my local airbrush artist here in South Philly, got some shirts airbrushed up, and we thought that was going to be a one night deal. And it's funny, if you watch come through the crowd, and we got the picketers like the NWO, NWO could come out, and they would have people with NWO signs, and we had people coming out with BWO signs, and one of those kids that hopped the guardrail with us was Chris Candido's brother Johnny, which is kind of cool. But we came out, we did the deal. It's going to be a one night thing, and then we walked through the curtain, and the reaction was pretty noticeable. So we're in the locker room, and Ty Gordon goes, "Yeah, I think we're going to do something with this." And I think they sold dollar signs with the T-shirts.
Oh yeah.
So they went and made the BWO T-shirts, and from what I was told from the merchandise people, the BWO was like they were selling like close to 200 shirts a night, and that for ECW, that's
damn good.
that's great business,
Yeah.
uh, we saw a fraction of that.
Yeah.
But dude, it was, we were on TV every week, and there was even like a whole episode of ECW Hardcore TV dedicated to the BWO, where instead of showing the opening ECW credits, they did a BWO opening credit for ECW Hardcore TV, and it was just so crazy. And then like signs start showing up on WWE Raw, and people walking through the crowd with BWO signs. It's like, my God, this is, it's kind of picking up steam. And then ECW invades Monday Night Raw in '97, and we come through the crowd, and there's already a lot of blue shirts in that crowd, and we run out, we're throwing out BWO shirts, and we were the first public acknowledgement of the NWO by Vince McMahon, because he's like, the BWO, not to be confused with the clothing line NWO. Basically, just calling that was his, just take a shot at WCW.
Take a jab, yeah.
Yeah, but dude, and then Stevie left. Eventually, as me and Nova, and we had to find our own way. BWO was done, but people still called me and Stevie, as me and Nova BWO, and we get BWO chants, and we start doing every now and then there were in the 2000s there would be like conventions, and that we get booked for BWO, and there was an opportunity to go back to the WWE. Stevie was going to go from the show Velocity to Smackdown,
Mm-hmm.
and they were talking about bringing the BWO back then because Smackdown's colors are blue and white. Hey, let's just do a little run with the BWO. Nova, who was in the office at the time, told me about that, and then the whole JBL thing happened. That kind of expedited that plan. But we went back to WWE as the BWO, and introduced us to a whole new fan base. There's the ECW fan base that remember the BWO, but now that we're going to the WWE in 2005, and we're about to come into the ring in JBL's limo, and me, Stevie, and Nova are sitting in there, and we're like, and Nova goes, "Can you believe that the BWO is still going, the NWO is going, and the BWO is still going?" Is
That's
we all just
true.
laughed. We all just laughed. It was like, yeah. But to this day, people still talk about the BWO, and because I live right here in South Philly in the heart of ECW country. I often joke that like when I walk around town, I feel like I'm running for mayor. It's like, hey, 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 dude.
Yeah.
Went to Metallica last night, and hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? Hey, can I get a photo? Yeah, sure. And awesome. I love it. I love it. I love meeting the fans, but we're- BWO debuted in '96, and here we are in 2005, and still doing it.
Uh-huh.
You know,
And and you own the rights to BWO now, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's just like it's the weirdest thing. Is like I couldn't really be sued because there's parody laws, but I was like, I got a trademark attorney. I was like, hey, see what you can do, and it went through. So I was like, all right, cool. And
That's
so
amazing.
because I was around time I renewed my name, and I was like, hey, why you're doing this? Just just check.
Yeah, just take a look.
Yeah, take a peek. And he came back and it went through, and I was like, oh, cool.
Amazing. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So obviously you guys have this great run. Eventually you do leave ECW. You do get your crack in WWE, which there are moments of that I enjoy that like I still watch. And I think I told you about this before. One of my favorite Rumbles to watch is, I believe it's the 99. It's the one that Vince wins.
Yeah.
And you're in that one. And I know you tell a really fun story about Edge in that one. But before we get to that, you come in, you're a part of the job squad. Fun group, like really a good time. And this is like when obviously with Al Snow and Head and there was a bunch of you guys in that. Talk about your experience with the job squad.
Well, Job Squad was it started off as a locker room joke, just like Al started the joke in WWE, amongst the boys in the back on, who's the most powerful group in wrestling. You think it's the superstars, but it's the guys doing the job, all it takes for one person to get up and no sell a finish.
That's true.
Yeah, who do you think's got the power? So, and then it became like, oh, we're going to be the job squad. He was saying this. And then, Al comes to ECW on loan from WWE or WWF at the time.
Yeah.
And it's weird to think that it's been WWE longer than it was WWF. It's kind of
It's
weird.
wild, isn't it?
Yeah. So Al, starts joking about it, and he starts, Jeff Jones, who was a graphic designer, made up a Job Squad logo based on the NWO logo, and Al had stickers made up, and he had T-shirts, and he was selling them, and the boys, he sold more shirts in the locker room to the boys than anything. And then like he goes back to the WWE, and it becomes a faction, and he it was him, Bob Holly, Scorpio, and Dwayne Gill. So, I'm coming home from a show, ironically enough, Norm Connors again in Pittsburgh. I get home and there's a message on my machine from Al. Hey, give me a call when you get a chance. All right. So I got him a call and he's like, hey, you under contract to Paul? I was like, nope. He's like, if there be an opportunity to work with the job squad in WWE, would you? Yep.
100%.
Yeah. So he goes back and gives them their information. Bruce Pritchard calls me. Hey, what's your information? Give him my vitals. He's like, all right. WWF's going to be in town on Sunday for Sunday Night Heat. Show up at 10 o'clock, because they had a split show with they had Sunday Night Heat during the day, and then they were going to break down, and the Flyers would be there that night.
Right.
Flyers or Sixers, I forget, but I'm sitting there in my bedroom. I just got off the phone with Bruce. I hung up the phone. I was like, just full body, buzzing. I was like, holy. So I walked like 10 to 15 feet from my bedroom to the living room, and I look at my mom and my grandma, and they stop and look at me, and I'm like, just put all the bills in my name. They're like, what? It's like, just put all the bills in my name. They're like, what? What? They knew, I was making okay money at ECW at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to, help out. They were supporting my wrestling habit, but I was like, put all the bills in my name. They're like, what are we talking about? I was like, I'm going to the WWF.
Oh,
And,
man.
my grandmom, she clutched the kitchen chair next to her. My mom goes, oh, my mom's like Edith Bunker, just, oh, it's like,
That's great.
and then they put the bills in my name, and my grandmom, passed away 2 years later, but she didn't have to lift a finger for anything. Her or my mom didn't have to lift a finger for anything.
Wow.
So I go down to Wells Fargo. Well, it was the FU Center then, but
Yeah.
show up and debuted, and the rest is history. So, you think about it. I debuted for WWE. I debuted for ECW in Philly, WWE in Philly, had my WrestleMania moment in Philly. I mean,
How was that? WrestleMania 15 in Philly. I mean,
yeah,
that has to be like a mind blowing, like almost spirit out of your body kind of an experience. Being the type of fan that we've obviously heard you talk about, I can't even imagine what that moment was like for you to walk out.
it's unreal. If you watch me and Goldust come to the ring, I'm so excited. I ran too far ahead of him. I was like shot out of a cannon. I had to come back. I was like, oh, he's back there. So I wander back and do the entrance with him, but it was just surreal. Everybody in the business, aspires to be a part of WrestleMania. It literally is the Super Bowl for professional wrestling, where the day after WrestleMania, it's like a reset. Unfortunately, where WrestleMania comes to post WrestleMania cuts and all that stuff. But the whole year you want to be a part of WrestleMania. And I was in Job Squad. Job Squad disbanded, and then I figured out a way to get myself aligned with Goldust, with the Blue Dust character. And they thought, we were two, unique characters that we work good together. So I started, managing Goldust, and it comes down to he's having a run for the Intercontinental Championship, and they had a 4-way match. It was Goldust. The champion was Road Dogg. There was Val Venus.
Yep.
And Ken Shamrock. And
Yep.
four-way match. And me and Goldust, me and Ryan Shamrock were vying for the attention of Goldust, and it was great. But the WrestleMania in my hometown, this is like the early days of WrestleMania, where they don't have fan access and they don't do Raw and SmackDown from the same city. When WrestleMania goes to a town now, they take it over for a week. This was just all right. WrestleMania Sunday, so we go to WrestleMania, and then the next day we're going up to the Meadowlands, and then we were going up to the it's on Long Island. I can't think of it. Where the hockey team, the Islanders played, whatever.
Oh,
That's
I
all
can't remember the name of it either. Yeah,
the Nassau Coliseum.
that's it. Yep.
And then from there we fly to Germany and England. So you don't really have time to digest things. You're just doing things and then traveling. And but it was awesome. Went to WrestleMania, went to the after party, and got to sleep in my own bed at the end of the night. And you look back, we did a couple things around town, that were kind of cool, but just indescribable.
I can remember as a kid, I live in South Jersey. You've been to my house before.
Yeah.
And so I'm 10 minutes off the Walt Whitman Bridge. And I can remember as a kid going across the Walt Whitman and seeing the big billboard that was up for WrestleMania 15. And it was like mind blown, like, wow, man, like they are really making a big, and it was a massive billboard, but I was like, oh man, it was like the climax, something where the raging climax or something was the quote for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really awesome. And I went back during this upcoming WrestleMania, started going back and watching a bunch of Manias, and I did watch 15. And honestly, I didn't even think about, the match with Goldust. So obviously coming in and seeing you in there, it kind of marked out a little bit. And I was watching the interactions with the two of you got, with like you with Ryan Shamrock, and it was just really good. Go back and check it out, especially if you're a Blue Meanie fan. But yeah, so you shortly after you have your exit from WWE, you do go back to ECW for a period of time. You lost like a ton of weight at that point, and did the total antithesis or whatever, the reverse of what your character is, where you were almost like an arrogant guy who like body shamed people and
Yeah.
whatnot. Like, what was that like to be the total opposite of everything that your actual values are?
Oh, it was just an idea because I was in WWE and they were asking me to lose weight. I was like, all right. So I started seeing a nutritionist, which was Headbanger Mosh's brother. He's right over in I think he's over in Blackwood, New Jersey. So I would go over see him once a week and you know take courses. So I lost like 160 pounds. I went from 390 down to about 240.
Mm-hmm.
And it's right when I got down to 240, WWE released me. I'm like, well, no, well, before that they sent me to Memphis, to like kind of like reinvent myself. It's like, all right, no problem. Go down there and this is like the late '90s, and the band Smash Mouth was like a big thing, and I always liked that guy. Like he had the thin beard and the spiky hair. And there's a movie at the time called Swingers, where the guys were wearing like the bowling shirts and what I call the Hot Topic shirts, or
Yep.
call them heat shirts because you get heat wearing them. I think Jericho launched that whole era of wearing shiny shirts.
100%.
But I was like, I'll dive into this character, and I was still the Blue Meanie, and in Memphis, trying this character, and then WWE releases me, and I was like, well, I could, get in touch with ECW, and Paul's like, you don't look like the Blue Meanie anymore. So I'm reaching out, and he's like, he brought me in as the character called the Blue Boy, which didn't care for the name.
Mm-hmm.
I spent all this time establishing one name, but came back just in time for ECW to close out. But like, the character was going to be the fat guy who we all know that guy who loses a whole bunch of weight and becomes like a jerk. So
Yeah.
that was the thing. Come back, lose the weight, come back, and kind of be a jerk. And it was short lived, but the crazy thing is, ECW closes, you go back to the Indies, and you're trying to get work as the Blue Meanie, and people are like, you don't look like the Blue Meanie anymore. So I was like, kind of had to put some weight back on just to play the character. I got to pay bills.
Yeah.
The Blue Meanie is established, the Blue Boy, not so much. So put the weight back on, and not in a bad way, but I'm like in betweeny meanie, in between
In betweeny meanie. I love that.
in between the heaviest and lightest. So I start doing indies, and just staying busy that way, and all the way up until One Night Stand comes along, and kind of relaunched my career because at that point I'd lost the weight, and then I didn't look like the Blue Meanie, but I kind of needed like a spark plug, to just kind of like pop my indie rates, and
Mm-hmm.
One Night Stand was that opportunity to have. Well, there was One Night Stand, and there was a Hardcore Reunion, which was 2 nights before the Jeremy Borash's
Yep. I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, in Philly 2 nights before, and
I'm
that
pretty sure
week.
I had that on DVD somewhere.
Oh yeah, yeah. But that weekend kind of revitalized the Blue Meanie character, like reintroduced myself to myself in a lot of ways because
Mm-hmm.
I kind of had lost my way. From 2000 2004, I lost my way. My grandma passed away, and it's just battling depression, and you
Yeah.
know, you know, I had a career. I was in WWF, I was in ECW. Now, ECW is gone, and I can't go to a WCW because WCW is gone. I always heard from like Mick Foley's like, getting released from WWE, you can make a killing on the indies, fresh off TV, run. And never got a chance to do that because ECW closed, WCW closed, so the whole indie market became flooded with all these name talents just fighting for spots on shows. So when the opportunity for One Night Stand, that whole week, ECW reunion weekend came along, it kind of like reintroduced me to a newer audience, but also I found myself again.
Yeah, I mean, what a special event that was too. Let's set the record straight on this real quick, right? Because we hear about this all the time.
You've
We
seen
don't need to
it,
dive in.
you know.
Yeah, we don't need to dive into the JBL story. If you
Right.
guys want to know what we're talking about, Brian has talked about it on his own podcast, which, by the way, you guys can definitely check out. Mind of the Meanie. But he's also, it's been talked about a million times. But I've been out with you a ton of times for a lot of these events, and there's always people that come up and ask or make a comment. And let's set the record straight. You and JBL, and I've talked to Mrs. Meanie about this. You and JBL are on more than good terms. You guys are like buddies now. So please let's clear the air on this.
Yeah, me at One Night Stand, me and JBL had a fight, and that just stemmed from, excuse me, during the Attitude Era. Things were crazy in the Attitude Era, and we had our issues, and it came to a head at One Night Stand. When I left WWE, I called him a bully, and God knows me. I did an interview with OneWrestling.com. He said he was a bully, and I'm sure by the time it got back to him, you know how the game of telephone is. It probably, by the time he heard it, it probably morphed into, I called him the worst thing ever in the world. And we had our fight. Stemming from me calling him a bully, and then after that, I kind of start writing about it on my blog and stuff like that, and WWE brought me back. We were going to do the BWO anyway, like I said, but the whole JBL thing, rushed that, and we had our match. Before our match on SmackDown in 2005, we went into a room and just talked, and I was like, "Hey, man," and he's like, "We can fight or we can make money." I was like, "Oh, never wanted to fight you." So we talked it out, and went out to the ring like two professionals and I had a great match. Flash forward, years later, I'm on Twitter and somebody's like, "Are my eyes deceiving me?" But is JBL following the Blue Meanie on Twitter? He's like, "Yeah, I love Meanie," and we've been friends longer than we had our beef. We had a beef from like 98 to 2000. And me and the One Night Stand thing happened 20 years ago, maybe. And we've been friends since then. Most recently I've been on this excuse me. I've been on JBL. JBL's got a podcast with Gerald Briscoe, Stories of Briscoe and Bradshaw. And I've gone on there as a guest, and then everybody knows I'm into the realm of UFOs and stuff like that, and they've had me on there as a guest host, and talking to people like just different people into UFOs, and most recently, like last week, myself, JBL, and Gerald Briscoe talked to the lead singer of Wang Chung about UFOs, and it was like
amazing,
the coolest interview ever, because I heard them mention something about UFOs on their podcast, and from there I just started fucking sending them like stuff. So they're like, "Well, since Meanie's our resident UFO guy, let's have him on as a guest host." And
you're like that. You're like the Hembo of UFOs over here.
yeah, yeah. I just because I believe I saw a UFO when I was a kid, 8 years old, in Margate, New Jersey, August '82. And I know it's August '82 because that's our last summer as being visitors to Atlantic City. And we moved to Atlantic City in '83, and we had our place in Atlantic City. My uncle had a place in Margate. We went over to his place for a cookout, and during the day we had the cookout. Then at night, adults are drinking daddy sodas and some beer. So I'm out in the front yard, and it's his house, the yard, boardwalk, beach, ocean. I'm just being a kid out there, like just doop doo doo, and I see a red light over the ocean. I'm just like, what? It's like, "Phew, phew." So I poke my head in. I go, "Hey, there's something over the water," and they're like, "Yeah, whatever." They think I'm pranking them. I'm the shitty kid pranking them, and my sister and my cousin ran out, and they're like, "Oh my god!" And they followed it to the end of the boardwalk, and they said it just went.
That's
So
crazy.
we're going back from Margate to our place in Atlantic City, and they had a talk radio show on. It's a show called Pinky Kravitz, and the guy sounded like he could have hung out with the Rat Pack back in the day. And there's people calling in saying this thing they saw in the sky, and everybody in the car just like kind of looks at me like I was like, yeah, I was telling the truth,
Yeah, yeah.
But and then years later, Showtime put out a 3-part miniseries on UFOs, and there's a footage of them interviewing a cop from Ventnor, New Jersey, in '82 about a UFO sighting, and it's like Channel 6 footage.
That's probably what you saw.
Yeah, and Ventnor's in between Margate and Atlantic City.
Mm-hmm.
And like when that happened, I did the Leonardo DiCaprio, like, pointing at the TV. It's like, that's my UFO. That's my UFO. And I took a photo of the screen and put it on Facebook for prosperity. So I remember the day I saw it, on the Showtime. So, but yeah, Briscoe and Bradshaw had me on their show. Oh, the other person we talked to was Dave Foley from Kids of the Hall, because
Oh man, that's a good one.
he's huge into the realm of UFOs. So, but yeah, me and Bradshaw are cool, man. And that episode should be dropping any day now. So, but yeah, we get along. We finished the podcast on Thursday. We all got on a 3-way call talking about what we thought about the podcast, and you know, it is what it is. But just people live in a bubble. Like it's one thing, you always see the headline, but you never see the retraction. The headline is Blue Meanie, JBL have a fight. They're, the small print is they made up and get along now. Nobody reads that small part.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and that's why I said, before we came on, I'm like, we don't have to dive into the whole story if you don't want to. It's been talked ad nauseum.
Yeah.
But I know you guys are buddies, and I'm like, let's just make sure everybody knows that.
Yeah.
Two more things for you here that I definitely want to touch on, just because I think it's really important. Because I want to be mindful of the time too. You are such a figure of the pro wrestling community in Philadelphia, and I say that to you, and that's not me blowing smoke up your ass. Facts are facts. I mean, people recognize you as one of the biggest advocates for the Philadelphia sports or Philadelphia professional wrestling scene. So WrestleMania 40 comes to Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, you were a part of the last time it was here at 15 as an in-ring performer. So it comes here, and we talked about it at the top. WWE has you be a part of their Priority Pass program.
Yeah.
But even bigger than that, and I think the event, the way it went down, kind of showed how many people in this community love you, and I'm not just talking about the fans. I'm talking about the performers, because you had so just to give everybody who did miss it, I think it was the Thursday night before Mania. You have MeanieMania at one of our, obviously your favorite place, one of ours. Hashtag hold my calls, McCusker's Tavern, 17th and Shunk, for anybody who wants to come and hang out with Mr. Meanie here. And maybe myself every now and then. And Mrs. Meanie, she's a trip to it.
Yeah.
But so you have this event, and I remember you telling me going into it, Brian, like there could be 25 people there, or there could be 250 people there. I really don't know. And I think you were more leaning on the this may not be as big as I think it is.
Because there's so much going on in Philly, and there's so many options to choose from. But I think our best option was we were free. You know, there's places charging you good money to go into a nightclub to listen to somebody spin music and
Mhm.
give wrestling themed drinks. And I'm like, well, we're free. You don't have to pay to come to our deal, and we're going. You know what? We're going to give you free food, and we're going to have giveaways. Just come out and hang out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it,
it was amazing too. And then you had obviously the people that showed up, right? I'm talking people from all over the world. And you had people all over the world. You had some of the most recognizable fans show up, like the obviously the Dusty Rhodes cosplay impersonators showed up and the Macho Man cosplay impersonators show up.
yeah, they're
I
great.
mean, yeah, you had them show up. And then obviously you have Braun Strowman, Jerry Lynn, Nunzio. Oh my god, I gotta go through. I mean, Henry O'Godwin.
Yep.
I mean, it was like a who's who, and then obviously I saved him because one of the big moments was the uh, impromptu moment that included a very special guy to you guys. Al Snow shows up and he participates in an unexpected wedding
Yeah.
at MeanieMania for Mr. and Mrs. Meanie. What a cool thing, and talk about that.
Man, so me and Mrs. Meanie been together 19 years. And I guess up at that point, I was 18. We always talked about wanting to get married. And, but our families live 200 miles apart. So I was like, oh, where do we have it? Do we make her family drive to Philly, or do I make my family go to Connecticut? Or, members of my family aren't doing well. They're sick. And it just became a thing. So we're planning MeanieMania, and we were thinking about, joking around doing April Fool's Day. We're like, nah, because me and Mrs. Meanie made a promise, no April Fools. We won't ever do an April Fools on each other. So, we're playing a MeanieMania, and she goes, "You want to do some paperwork?" It's like, yeah. And she once she focuses on something, she's laser focused. So
She locks in.
yeah. So she found out in Pennsylvania there's this thing called a Quaker wedding where you don't even need a priest. You just need two witnesses to sign the document, take it to City Hall, you're married. So we're planning on do like a Spaceballs type wedding where we'll grab the mic and go, yeah, do you? Yes. Do you? Yes. All right, you're married, kind of thing. So there was like a point in the night, and nobody knew this. Nobody knew this. So me and Tracy, Mrs. Meanie are standing there. We're like, when's a good time? So our friend Mark, who was doing Quizzo, brought a PA. So he starts setting up his PA. I was like, let's do this now. I was like, hey, Al, because we needed witnesses. Our friend Al, Al Snow, and our friend Sebastian, who's a close personal friend. And we're like, hey, guys, come to the front with us. I got to make some announcements. Welcome to MeanieMania kind of thing. Like Vince at the beginning of WrestleMania, welcome to WrestleMania. I was like, hey, they're like, all right, so doop doo. We work our way through the crowd, go up to the front where the PA is. I just grabbed the mic, hey everybody. I asked Dougie to turn the music down for a second. He's like, hey, welcome to MeanieMania. I'm the Blue Meanie. Tip the bartender. Here's some food. Making a general announcements. I was like, oh, we got Mrs. Meanie over here. I call her Mrs. Meanie, but I call her my wife, even though she's my girlfriend. For the last 18 years, but that's about to change right here, right now. And the crowd was like, what? And they're like, oh, hold on, what's going on? So Tracy takes the rings out, and I go, Sebastian, hold our rings, please. And people are like, is this an engagement? And then we start, going through the process, and Al's like, grabs the mic. He goes, I'm ordained to be a priest. And Tracy's like, no, we're going to do Spaceballs wedding. And then Al just said, fuck that, and took the mic. And, do you, Blue Meanie, take Mrs. Meanie to be your lawfully wedded wife? And we normally say, I do, but we're still in Spaceballs mode where we're like, yes. And he's like, it's supposed to be I do. But anyway, he asked her, she goes, yes. And he goes, I now pronounce you Mr. and Mrs. Blue Meanie. And the bar starts chanting, holy shit,
holy shit after a wedding was amazing.
Holy shit chant for a wedding. And it was just cool. There's some footage of it. I think you might have been.
I sent you one of the videos. Yeah.
Yes. And I pinned them to the top of my Instagram. And one's from the point where I say right here, right now, which missed the initial thing, but I got another clip. So I got the hey, I'm Blue Meanie.
I think that one's mine. I sent you the one that's a little bit further off. That was the one I say, because we didn't know. So I was standing there talking to Braun.
Yeah.
And we're like, I had just gotten into a conversation with him, and then we hear you start talking. So everybody's like, shh, Meanie's talking. And then we look at you, and that's when you go into the thing. And I will never forget it, because Braun is a lot bigger than I am, obviously, Braun Strowman. I just looked at him, and he looked at me, and we went, like you said, it was like, is this an engagement? And I was like, I thought they were already kind of engaged. And then he was like, oh shit, they're getting married. And we just had this moment of me looking up at this towering guy who was just as shocked as I was. And we were like, holy shit, they're getting married. And everybody popped. It was awesome.
It was great. It's best day of my life. Just she's been my rock.
She's awesome, by the way. Yeah. If anybody meets Brian at the events, Mrs. Meanie's there like 98% of the time.
Yeah.
She is the sweetest person. She loves to have great conversations with people. I mean, really, Tracy is awesome.
Yeah, she's been with me 19 years. And like when we met, and then like she moved down, and then I got sick. I got a bacterial infection called empyema, and it was I got a bacterial infection in my left lung, and I had to go to the hospital, had to have surgery. I'm spitting up blood, and she didn't leave. She stayed with me. When I'm in the bed, hospital bed, coughing up blood, she's putting the spittoon underneath my mouth. She's wiping my head, because I'm, breaking out in sweats, and anybody else would have left. She was only living with me for like 3 months at that time. She could have just left.
Mm-hmm. And you wouldn't have blamed her. Honestly, it's a lot to deal with.
But she stayed.
She did.
She's been with me through a lot of stuff, and she's my best friend. So now when I do events, it's just like I try to work it into how can I bring her along? My first part of my career, I missed so many things. I missed weddings, I missed birthdays, I missed deaths, and now in my life, it's just like I want to experience everything and bring Mrs. Meanie along with it. So she's my best friend in the world.
Yeah, she's awesome. I know my girlfriend Christina loves to be around her. We have a lot of fun with you guys. So yeah, if you guys get and check out, she does tremendous work with some of the vests that she creates, and if you guys get an opportunity, check them out. Take pictures of them with them when she's wearing them. She wore an amazing Taboo one when we saw you guys the night of the NWA event. That again she made. It was gorgeous. Last thing I just want to touch on before we let you go here, buddy, and we talk about it a lot, so we're not going to deep dive, but everybody knows you are a hardcore Philadelphia sports fan.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of people see you at a lot of the different events, Phillies games, whatnot. Me and you have done Eagles podcasts together. Hopefully this season we can jump on again for a few times in the season.
Sure.
But your love specifically for the Philadelphia Eagles, right?
Yeah.
So we haven't talked to you in a while. If anybody wants to hear a little bit, I know, I loved it. If anybody wants to know about it, you can go back and really check out some of the shows. That's kind of how me and Brian got connected. Was we did something in 2022 when the Eagles were together. We've done a live show from the 2300 Arena previewing the Cowboys. The Eagles this season, buddy. We got back to the mountaintop. I want to talk. I just want to hear you talk about how was it. I know. Oh, I can't believe you have it right behind you. I can't wait to say it. This thing is beautiful. So you get like, this is the second time, right? Because you got one made for the last one.
Yeah.
So you got these custom championship. Amazing. It is so gorgeous.
Yeah. I'm very
Eagles get there again this time. Talk about it, buddy. How are you feeling after this Super Bowl?
I'm still waiting for him to throw a flag on us, to take it away from us, Oh, it's May, penalty,
Yeah.
take it back. But dude, it just the doesn't seem real. I'm kind of pissed they didn't put out a Super Bowl Blu-ray this year, like they did with
I know. I was so freaking pissed. I kept looking and looking and looking. And they actually stopped doing it last year.
Of
So
course.
the last time we lost in 22, the 22 season, was the last year they released one.
Oh my God. But yeah, dude, it just all the adversity and stuff like that, some that was there, some that was manufactured, sports radio's got to talk about something, right? So, just to get through all that and then, have Jalen, get a concussion, kind of like, the 22 year when he, had the collarbone injury, going into the playoffs. I was like, man, but, it was a lot like 17, the first game, a little rough. But then, did you go to the championship game and, they just, roll over the Washington, Commanders. And then in the Super Bowl, they put on a defensive clinic against the Kansas City Chiefs. And me being a professional wrestler, I'm into storylines. And I know that a lot of those guys remembered the Super Bowl 2 years before, and, the field was not so favorable, but, this game was on turf and, the Eagles were undefeated on turf. And then, after the Super Bowl, they lost to the Chiefs. The offensive linemen are wearing shirts that says 0 sacks. And I think this team remembered a lot of that, and they just went in there with hellfire and fury and just beat the living tar out of, Patrick Mahomes. I mean, you always want to win. You always want to win a championship, but like to say, the 2 Super Bowls the Eagles have won were against the Patriots and the Chiefs, and they were both like revenge games. It was the sweetest revenge, But every day I watch some part of the Super Bowl, whether it's one highlight or a whole recap. I've watched the game in its entirety. I even found somebody who took the game and put Merrill Reese and Mike Quick over the whole game. Just
oh, that's awesome.
I'm a lunatic.
I found a website that actually does and I'll tell you off the air if you want to use it. They, for a price, they basically sell the seasons, or you could buy the playoff run. So for like $32, I got all 4 playoff games in their full broadcasts.
Awesome.
Honestly, I could copy them for you because I actually have a copier. But yeah, and like I have those, and I honestly I had bought the 22 one even though they lost the Super Bowl, just because to me, you make a run of the Super Bowl, that's a hell of a season regardless, and I know we're gonna get back. I remember we were at McCusker's the week before. Yeah. And I think that was when me and you both had the same jersey on, and Tracy and Christina were making fun of us Because they're like, "Did you guys like plan this?" And we're like, "No, not at all." I knew he
Yeah,
had 65. I didn't know he had 55.
yeah. We showed up like Romeo and Michelle at the high school reunion.
But I remember saying to you that night, I said, I don't know what it is. And I think you agreed with me. I said, this could either be like nail biting down to the wire. I said, honestly, my gut's starting to tell me they're going to blow this team out of the water.
Yeah,
And it just started to feel that way. But man, and I think for me, Brian, you might agree with this. A lot of people over the years have said, was that Super Bowl in 17 just like a one off, like a fluky thing? And because of the circumstance, you got the greatest 10 quarters from Nick Foles and this and that. So to have that win with that same general manager, with the, I mean, it's a smaller bit, but the same leadership core that was there, minus like Fletcher Cox and Kelsey,
right.
and coming off of just getting there 2 years ago. I think it validates that. And like you said, the age old debate will be who's the greatest of all time, Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes. Guess what? We beat them both.
Yeah, yeah. They're only Brady only lost what, twice in the Super Bowl, or no,
Yeah.
3 times.
3 times, all the NFC East teams.
Yeah. So Nick Foles, and then Patrick Mahomes lost to Brady, and he lost to Jalen Hurts. And then there's always that lame debate of, is Jalen Hurts elite? I think he's proven the point that I think he's elite. I haven't been a Jalen Hurts fan since day one. His signing was just the signal that Wentz hadn't recovered from that concussion. In my mind, but man, just to see them get to 2 Super Bowls in less than 10 years, or 3 Super Bowls in less than 10 years, and win 2 of them. These kids, nowadays are spoiled. They don't know what it's like to suffer like you and I have, and maybe a little bit longer because I'm older, but
The vet, baby. I mean, the 700 level, people have no, like, pre Jeffrey Lurie. I say this all the time. And it's why, like, I hate when people knock Andy Reid because, oh, he never won the big one. Like, to me, it's almost like Bill Buckner in Boston, where they gave him, like, it's like, let's move past this. This culture and the way this organization is, pre Jeffrey Lurie and Andy Reid era, when you're talking about Norman Brayman and what a piece of shit he was as an owner, who
yeah,
he didn't want to pay Reggie White. He didn't believe in any of that. He bought the team to flip it. It's like a house buyer who flips houses.
yeah.
He was never investing in the team. And prior to that, they had an owner that cared, but he wasn't. They were just never able to get over the top when you talk about the buddy teams early on.
Buddy ball.
But buddy ball. But like the Eagles' history, it was not good overall.
No.
Minus the like from 1960 on, basically up until 80. You had your one off of the 80s, but I always say like these kids now, oh my god, they're like, oh my god, they didn't do good. They're only 10-6 or 10-7, whatever it is now. It's like, yo, I remember what it was like when Mike Mamula was drafted. Okay, like Danny.
Yeah.
Not even that far. Danny Watkins, because there's a generation now that don't even remember the Danny Watkins draft.
Right.
Which is boom. But
there's a generation that doesn't remember when Eagles games used to be blacked out for lack of ticket sales.
Yep.
Yeah, you couldn't watch an Eagles game because people weren't buying tickets to go see the Eagles. So if you did get a chance to watch the Eagles, it's because a company went and bought up those tickets.
Yep.
And that's how you watch the Eagles play. It's crazy.
Yeah. Last one. Coming into this year, how do you feel about the team this year? I mean, obviously Jihad Campbell, I thought they drafted really well. But just your quick thoughts on your confidence level going into the 2025 Eagles season.
Dude, I'm dying to see Ty Robinson, see what he can do. Yeah, they drafted really well. And people are like, we lost so many people on defense, but the guys we lost on defense benefited from the fact that they got to line up next to Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter's, absorbing 2 defenders, 2 offensive linemen, they're double teaming Jalen Carter. So of course, everybody else is going to eat a little bit, so, I think the final shoe that might stop, drop is if we get Simmons, who's still out there in free agency, who's worked under, Vic Fangio. So we'll see what happens. But I like where we're at going into this season. I like that, the offense is kind of going to be pretty much the same. Not the same, but like the new coordinator, there's still a familiarity amongst the players where you're not bringing in a total stranger who's going to restructure everything. You got to learn a whole new playbook. The verbiage is, the terminology is going to be the same, and you still have Coach Vic there on defense, and they just get Campbell. Hopefully, he's ready to go week one. We'll see. It might be like a Cooper DeJean thing where he plays maybe week 4. Who knows? But I love where this team's at, and the only thing I hate about the Eagles season is it makes my summers go by too quick because I'm a summer person. I love when the sun's out till 8:00 and wearing shorts and the tank top, and I was a beach baby growing up, so that's the only downside to football is my summer goes by too quick because I want to watch football.
See, I agree, but only see on the other side of it. To me, it's like it makes the fall and winter go by faster.
That too.
You know what I mean? Because it's kind of like when the summer ends, I'm bummed, but I'm like, at least I have football now. Like I'm ready to go.
Yeah, and thank God for the playoffs because to me, the day after January 1st is like January 2nd to March. To me, is like the worst. The sun's out. Sun's down at like 4:00.
Mm-hmm.
And you're walking around stepping in snow-covered dog poop, and it's just like just the worst. The sky's gray. At least football season. You got Halloween, you got Thanksgiving, you got Christmas, festive stuff.
Yeah.
January to March, you're just sitting there like grumpy cat, like
100%, 100%. It's rough.
Yeah.
But thanks, bro. I appreciate you coming on. This was a little longer than we expected, but I mean, there's a lot to talk about, and
I can talk. So
hey, that's all right. And if anybody wants to talk to Brian, again, shameless plug for our favorite place. Come out to McCusker's Tavern, 17th and Shunk. But if you also want to hear Brian talk, please make sure that you guys go and check out Mind of Meanie. Fantastic. Where else can we find you, Brian?
Every Monday morning, wherever you get your favorite podcast, Mind of the Meanie. I also have a podcast on ad-free shows, which is behind a paywall, but every Saturday morning it's called Mornings with Meanie, where I recap the week events in professional wrestling. If you would like to support the Blue Meanie, go to ProWrestlingTees.com/Blue Meanie. Get yourself a BWO shirt that we talked about earlier. And I got a bunch of shirts up there. I think I even have a McCusker shirt up there that they, asked me to sell for them. So, I'm constantly doing stuff, going out there, doing signings, doing conventions, whatever. Just having a good time interacting with the fans.
Yeah, he really is, and again, one of the most genuine, best experiences you'll meet out there. And just a quick programming reminder, obviously, again, for anybody who needs to see it, that's the logo you're looking for on all your podcast platforms. Great cover art, by the way.
By the great Hal Haney.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. Make sure you guys go check it out. Mind of the Meanie. It's really, really great. And obviously for next week, make sure you guys come back, check us out next Tuesday, June 3rd. We're going to have the Director of Authority for TNA Wrestling, former WWE superstar, and actually a really good current guest to have because of the TNA WWE working relationship. We can have that conversation and much more. The Milan Miracle, Santino Morella, is going to join us next week. We appreciate that and excited for that. But yeah, Ryan, great conversation again. Appreciate you.
Always.
You're an avid guest here on not Lazy Book, but A2D Radio, now Lazy Booking alumni. And thank you. And again, hey, give Mrs. Meanie my love and everybody's love here. And I know I will see you soon. And last but not least, because we have to show love, back to our sponsor here, Specialized Physical Therapy and Dr. Paul Vidal. And again, any kind of aches and pains, any previous injuries, or any kind of nags that you have going on, please go check out his award-winning team at specializedphysicaltherapy.com, or you can go to their physical locations in Burlington and Cherry Hill, New Jersey. But for myself, for the Blue Meanie, and everybody here at A2D Radio, there it is. We were waiting for it. And screw Nick Wright still, by the way.
Yeah.
You guys enjoy your week. And if you go out there and anybody that's around you, make sure you let people know that you love them, you care about them, give them a hug.
Absolutely.